Welcome back to today's COG Extra on the road to UN Climate Week. I'm Charlie Muirhead, the CEO and co-founder of COGX, and it's an absolute thrill to have you here today from wherever you are in the world. Don't forget that you can send your questions to the speakers on the COGX platform, and please do take the time to go and check out the amazing expo and some of the brilliant organizations showcasing their products there. Now, in the past year, the impact of farming and food on both planetary and personal health has been getting a great deal of press. In terms of biodiversity loss, carbon footprint, and population health, there are huge systemic issues to address. Where are we heading? What can the government do? What can civil society and startups do? That's the topic of our next session. And chairing our panel of experts is going to be Dan Crossley, the Executive Director of the Food Ethics Council. Dan, are you there?
I am, yes. Thanks, Charlie. Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be part of this discussion today. Really looking forward to what I'm sure will be a great conversation. I want to start us off welcoming you to 16th of September 2030. Congratulations. We've all made huge strides towards net zero food and farming and net zero society that we live in. And you've all played a massive part in it. So thank you. Now I want to come back to reality, to 16th September 2020. Clearly, there is a lot going on in the world at the moment. We'll hear a bit about that in a moment. Huge things happening in the food system and that will impact the food system potentially for many years to come. But it's also an exciting time. There are there's lots of potential, lots of opportunities out there. So delighted that we've got three speakers to join us today who we'll hear from in a moment. The reason I start with the positive 2030 vision, if you like, of where we can get to is because too often in these debates we start with hockey style graphs about runaway climate change, biodiversity loss, obesity crisis and beyond, and it can be quite depressing and demoralizing, and I'm in no way underplaying or ignoring those issues, but I'm really keen that we try and maintain a kind of hope and positivity through the various crises we're facing. So really looking forward to the discussion today. Climate change impacts the food system and farming in a whole host of different ways. And conversely, food and farming system, so it can be a big contributor to a better climate solutions, but also the climate change impacts what happens to food and farming, where it's grown, affects yield, etc. So there's a huge amount to explore in this debate. I'd say for me, the crunch question is what opportunities are there to address the climate emergency through food and farming? To help us with that, we've got three fantastic speakers. Delighted we're joined by Tamsin Cooper from Department for Environment, Food, Rural Affairs, who leads the National Food Strategy team at DEFRA, working closely with Henry Dimbleby. And we'll hear from her in a moment to talk about what the National Food Strategy for England is trying to do. Then we'll hear from Mark Titterington, who's Head of Public Affairs and Marketing Europe for Indigo Agriculture. I'll let Mark introduce Indigo, but just to give you a flavour, Indigo develop microbial and digital technologies aimed at improving grower profitability, environmental sustainability and human health. So he'll talk a bit about how Indigo is working with farmers to reward them for capturing carbon and improving soil health, etc. And then finally, we'll hear from Tasha Makayakora, who is Youth Board Member at Bite Back 2030, inspired by Jamie Oliver, and she will share her story about social justice and food and the importance of trade deals, very live at the moment, and why that's important for all of us, and particularly for younger and future generations. So those will be our three speakers. We'll hear from each of those in turn, 5 minutes or so. I'll then get space to ask them a few questions, and then there's opportunity to hear from questions from you. Really keen that we get a lively debate. Do feel free to ask tough questions of our panelists. I'm sure they will thank me for saying that. But with that, keen to kick things off. So we will first hear from Tamsin. So over to Tamsin, who will talk a little bit about the National Food Strategy, what that really means, how ambitious that's trying to be, and what the role for climate is within that. Over to you, Tamsin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you to the organisers of this conversation today. And I'm really looking forward to the tough questions. So as Dan has said, I lead the National Food Strategy. It is an independent review of the food system in England. And the independent reviewer is Henry Dimbleby, who you may know. He is the lead non-exec director in DEFRA. He co-authored the school food plan, which looked into school food and the changes in children's diets. And he was co-founder, or he is co-founder of the restaurant chain Leon. So he brings a perspective from retail and from school food to this work. The National Food Strategy, were the idea of and the identification of a need for the National Food Strategy, first originated from DEFRA's then Secretary of State, Michael Gove. And he recognised that in order to realise the government's ambition in relation to nature, to environment and to climate, that we needed to take a sort of a wholesale look at the food system, and particularly to understand the reasons for why it was not only providing a whole host of positive outcomes, but it was contributing to negative environmental impacts and causing impacts on diet. So he commissioned a field to fork review of the food system. Our terms of reference are very ambitious in scope, and the intent is to derive a strategy and to develop a strategy to pivot the food system from a system that provides sustenance and choice for consumers to one which does not cause the dietary ill health and environmental impacts that we see today. As an independent review, it is independent on government. So although it is a group of civil servants that are working on it, and across government, it means that we can be more ambitious than current government policy. And it culminates in advice to government and a series of recommendations that we hope government will take account of. It was always intended as a strategy of two parts. And in part one, we sought to take an analysis of the food system to look at some of the power structures, some of the underpinning economics of the system, to look at the food environments and some of the socio-cultural and institutional factors that contribute to the outcomes that we see today. And then part two was intended as a vision and a plan with a set of targets and metrics of how you get to secure the shifts in the food system to secure those sustainability outcomes, culminating in a series of recommendations both to government but to other actors in the system, including industry, for how we think we need to get there. And then written into the terms of reference is that government will respond with a white paper, and Henry will come back in his capacity as reviewer to assess progress against our recommendations. That was the plan. And then, as you will all be familiar, at the start of this year, COVID struck and the team disbanded, and we went to lead the government response on supporting accessing food, supporting the vulnerable to access food. And we looked at, the sort of package of support as well as some of the economic issues that families were experiencing. And that gave some very tangible and material insights, both into the resilience of the food system and its adaptability in many respects, but also where there are structural weaknesses. And we then, when we reconvened as a team, we decided to refocus the strategy, part one of the strategy, on the very urgent issues that had arisen due to the COVID pandemic. And those some of those issues endure today. So in July, we published part one of the National Food Strategy, covering health and obesity, covering food poverty, and particularly the impact that has on children who are not able to access some food for affordability reasons. And we covered the trade dimension of food, we'd covered trade. And that was because by the time we published the next round, part two of the strategy, some of those important political decisions on trade and how that impacts on agriculture and our food system will have been taken. So So part one of the food strategy recommendations on health have been endorsed by government within the National Obesity Strategy. They related to promotions and advertising of certain types of food. The recommendations have been considered by the Trade Commission, and critically, the three recommendations, which amount to £1 billion of government expenditure to extend and boost existing mechanisms to support children to stop being hungry at this time and to have access to at least one healthy meal per day. We do not know whether government will respond and whether they will adopt those recommendations, but as some of you may be aware, we are now the footballer Marcus Rashford, who has intervened in the conversation around free school meals. He has brought together a task force, including retailers, to end child poverty and has adopted 3 of the recommendations of the National Food Strategy as part of that campaign. As a team, we are now focused on part 2, and we will publish in spring 2021. Whilst the recommendations in part 1 were inevitably targeted and specific, those in part 2 will be much more ambitious and sweeping in nature. They will cover the climate crisis. We will look into land use and land use change. We will look into diets and some of the interventions on diets that shift behavioural changes. We will look at novel foods. We will look at the issue of measuring the externalities in the system as a first step towards addressing them. And we will look at the role of data, digital science and innovation in affecting some of the changes we need to see. There will also be a piece of work on some of the institutional changes within government to stop this being a sort of siloed issue and to look at it through a more systems lens. And part 2 will not just be focused on actions for government. We are working closely with industry to look at the actions that retailers, tech companies and others can take in order to affect the vision. We know that many of the issues and topics and policies we are investigating will be contested. Issues around the role of government in intervening in diets, some of the technology related questions, they are inherently values driven decisions, and therefore alongside our engagement with the best minds in industry, in academia and in government, we're conducting a programme of citizen engagement and public deliberation to understand what permission the public give to government, to industry and to other actors in the food system to shift, to intervene and to see where they feel responsibility for change lies. So that I will leave it at that. I encourage you to look at our website. You will see copies of our report on the website, nationalfoodstrategy.org, and do get in touch. We would love to hear from people who are working on similar issues to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamsin. A brilliant whistle stop through National Food Strategy, what it's trying to do, and what the level of ambition is. And I should say, as Exec Director of one of a number of NGOs working in the food space, our mission is to accelerate the shift to a fair food system. It's fantastic to hear that ambition, and that we hope that the strategy will look seriously at issues around climate alongside many others. So thank you for that. And I would encourage those of you joining from different parts of England and the UK and indeed beyond to share experiences, share suggestions on this chat and beyond. I'd love to hear from devolved administrations and indeed internationally on examples of things that are working well in the policy environment in where you are. Thank you, Tamsin. We'll move on to Mark. Mark Chidrington, Head of Public Affairs and Marketing Europe, Indigo Agriculture. Mark, over to you to give a flavour of what Indigo is about, what contribution that might make to the climate emergency in particular. So over to you, Mark.
Great, thanks, Dan. Great to be here. Thanks to the organisers for putting this together. It feels like a really timely opportunity to be doing this as well. Almost a day doesn't go by without being reminded of the role that agriculture can play in the climate challenge that we all face. This morning we heard the European Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen talk about the revised emission targets, increasing those to at least 55%. On 1990 levels in a State of the Union address this morning. We also heard a report and letter from people involved with Natural England talking about how the UK and England in particular has become one of the most nature depleted areas of the world. And I think that reminds me that agriculture and land use in particular has to be part of the solution. And I think that here companies like Indigo Agriculture can make a contribution. It is a startup. It was founded in 2014 in Boston, Massachusetts. Has grown in that time to over 1,000 employees, predominantly in North America, but also in LATAM and India. And last year established its European headquarters in Basel in Switzerland. And it does have this ethos to challenge the status quo, challenge the way that we've perhaps been doing things. And I certainly have personally found the mission to be clear and inspiring. Harness nature to help farmers sustainably feed the planet by improving farm profitability, improving the sustainability of agriculture, and better aligning agriculture practices with consumer health. There are several dimensions of the business that are probably worth just highlighting before I focus in on the carbon story. Indigo Marketplace decommoditizes agriculture by connecting farmers and buyers directly, so that they can source, identity preserve, specialty grown crops, which could include crops grown to sustainability standards. That's already the world's largest digital grain platform of its type. And then Indigo Carbon, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, connects farmers implementing beneficial or regenerative agriculture practices that improve soil health and enable carbon to be sequestered in the soil. Connects those growers with buyers that need to offset the emissions in their own footprint that they can't otherwise reduce. And both of these businesses are enabled by digital innovation and where the company started, microbial technology, which has significant potential to improve yields, to improve the resilience of crops, and also to optimize, reduce, replace, as you wish, synthetic inputs like pesticides and fertilizers. So I find this a really exciting and potentially transformative business, particularly for those of us that have spent most of our careers looking at how we build a more sustainable and resilient food and agriculture system. Let me expand briefly on carbon, and then happy to take questions about it. To achieve the climate targets that we've set ourselves, European Union, UK, governments around the world, whether it's to reduce emissions by 2030 or to be climate neutral by 2050, we think that removing atmospheric CO2 has to be part of the solution. And we think that sequestering carbon in agricultural soils by photosynthesis is one of the most scalable, affordable, and arguably immediately impactful solutions that there are out there. It has at least the same potential as forestry, and maybe even greater and easier to get after. Key to this is the adoption of a number of regenerative agriculture practices. More effective, extended crop rotations, cover crops, minimal or no ploughing, reducing the soil disturbance to an absolute minimum, reducing reliance on synthetic inputs like pesticides and fertilizer, and where appropriate, integrating livestock. This also delivers benefits to improvement of soil health, the holy grail in many respects in terms of sustainability of agriculture, the climate resilience of crops, especially to drought, yield, and farm profitability. Indigo supports the growers in making the transition to regenerative agriculture, and by using a rigorous and robust methodology, which really is leading edge, we're going to be able to verify the amount of carbon that is sequestered in the soil and ultimately turn that into a tradable certificate, which could be bought by companies and others wanting to offset the emissions that they're unable to reduce themselves in their own sphere of influence. But that could also be bought by governments, NGOs, foundations could invest in them, and even consumers. And I think the beauty of this is that it's a win-win-win, a win for grower revenue and profitability, farm profitability. It adds another incentive into the system that can drive environmental sustainability. And of course, it helps to make agriculture part of the solution to climate change. So we're already up and running with indigo carbon in the US, but I think the support for regenerative agriculture practices and soil health and carbon farming, which is certainly recognized in the EU Green Deal, but also what looks like strong interest from the UK. It's great to hear Tamsin talk about the national strategy, strong interest in the post-Brexit agri-environment policy, which seems to go in the same direction. So Indigo's very excited about what's possible here in Europe. We're going to get started in Germany this coming winter crop season with about 20 winter cereal growers, and we're partnering with a well-known downstream agri-food industry player in doing that. And then thereafter we're looking to scale up right across Europe, and we hope that there will also be a good fit here with the UK. So Dan, in about 5 or 6 minutes, I hope that gives you and panelists and other members of the audience a flavour of what Indigo is doing, and certainly looking forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. Fantastic to hear what Indigo is about and is trying to do. And I'm sure there are lots of other organisations out there, probably on this call and beyond, that are that would trying to shift the dial when it comes to food and farming, and also changing the way that it's portrayed. I think too often farming is portrayed as the bad guy, or the bad, the sort of the villain of the piece. I think there is a lot that sustainable farming can do, both in the climate front and beyond. So thank you for that, Mark. I know there's been a question asked on Slido, which I wonder if we could just put the results of that up as they stand at the moment around technology, following on from, okay, so there we go, that's pretty comprehensive. Will technology aid sustainable agriculture? There's perhaps unsurprisingly, given the audience, but also, my sense would be it depends on which technologies we're talking about. But I think it's good to see there's an enthusiasm for technology. Done well. Thank you for that. So we'll continue now, and with our final speaker, Tasha Makaya-Kora, said Youth Board member at Bite Back 2030. Thank you very much for joining us, Tasha. I'll hand over to you for your 5 minutes.
Fabulous. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to COGEX for having me. Really appreciate it. So I normally start this kind of thing with why I joined Bite Back. And for me, it kind of just came down to the fact that I'm just really passionate about the health and well-being of young people. For far too many years, the health of young people has been neglected in terms of how businesses operate. It's always been profits over health. And now we can see the results of that, the impact of that. We now have a childhood obesity epidemic where the majority of young people are starting secondary school and not their best shape. And I think that needs to change. And what Bite Back do, and what's really different about Bite Back from any other food campaign or food organisation, is at the heart of the organisation is the Youth Board, and we're a group of young people who really want to change the world and achieve a world where every child has the opportunity to thrive and be healthy, no matter where they live. For so long, your location determines the kind of food that you have access to, how affordable it is, and so this obviously has created health disparities within our society, which I think it needs to end. And how we aim to do this is by telling the truth on how the food system operates, how it's designed, and we aim to redesign it to put the health of young people at the forefront of its operations. And by building powerful alliances with like businesses and governments and parents and schools who make this redesign a reality. And a lot of our campaigns are run as they address different issues within the food system, whether that's advertising, manipulative labeling on food products. And we've had a great amount of support from loads of young people, which kind of shows that young people are very much invested in their own health and are looking for somewhere that can make this change. But also we've had support from the likes of David Gandhi and Dr. Alex from Love Island, which is fantastic. And that's pretty much how and why I joined Bite Back. But I just really wanted to focus this talk on the impact of trade deals. So the future of the UK trading relationship with the EU and other countries remain uncertain. I think free trade deals agreements, they play a big role in spreading high calorie diets, foods that are high in salt, sugar, and fat, and all of this could have an impact on Britain's diet, especially that of young people. Earlier on in the year, about 1 million people signed a petition that was #SaveOurStandards. But so far, the government's response has been quite awful, if I could say so. Their Trade and Agriculture Commission doesn't have any public health experts or any child obesity experts, and it is expected to last about 6 months. This needs more teeth. It needs to be something more concrete, more solid, and there needs to be proper scrutiny by Parliament on these trade deals. I kind of see 3 major risks when it comes to public health in respect to healthy eating and obesity. The wrong trade deal could result to low-cost, ultra-processed foods being flooded on our UK market, and we'll see prices for healthy food, fruit and vegetable go up, and obviously that will reduce the consumption from consumers, but also action to promote healthier diets and tackle obesity could really be undermined. My main concern as well is any trade agreement that comes out of the US. We know that Trump is very vocal about his anti-clearer labelings. So he's very much against any movement to make sure that food have clear labels and they warn consumers whether they're high in fat, salt, and sugar. And he's also very much against any labeling that tell consumers when food has been genetically modified. So my concern is when we look at the history of the US with other countries where they have formed trade deals, a lot of the time the health of people has been undermined. Last week in the 5x15 event, I gave an example of Canada, they had a trade deal with the US, and they saw that their obesity rates pretty much doubled in less than about 10 years. And that was a result of having foods that were ultra processed, foods that was just so unhealthy, really cheap, being transported into the country. And we see similar trends as well in Mexico, So since Mexico signed a trade deal with the US in 1994, their obesity rate pretty much done the same thing as that of Canada. They saw an increase in consumption of high fructose corn syrup, which is just a type of sugar from cornstarch, which obviously rose significantly after the trade deal with the US. So I really do think these trade deals could undermine all the efforts that Boris has put into the childhood obesity strategy with the so that could include the 9 p.m. watershed, clearer labeling, having the sugar tax extended to include sports drinks, and milkshake drinks as well. So it's really for us to make sure that whatever trade deal happens, whether it's with the US or with other EU countries, is to make sure that children's health is protected, our environmental standards are protected, and any animal welfare in any trade are maintained, right? The government's answer to this in the Agriculture and Trade Commission is to examine trade deals, but it doesn't have much power. Like I said, it doesn't have all the right voices in the room, which is terrible. And over 1 million people have signed the National Farmers Union petition by Jamie in March. So again, this just emphasizes how people at the ground, the people at the bottom, they really do care about maintaining these food standards. We're not saying that we don't want a trade deal. We're just making sure that whatever trade deal that we have really does keep and protect the health of young people, and that we can only be going forward and not backwards in whatever trade deal that we do. So with that said, the Buy It Back will be launching a trade deal campaign in a couple of weeks. So we do hope that you support us. You can have a look at our website at buyitback2030.com. And again, stay tuned on our social medias where you can keep up to date with the kind of campaigns that we're running, whether they're trade deal related or not. But also, it's very important for us to be using our platforms to be the voice of young people, because a lot of the time young people's voices can be neglected and dismissed as just, it's just noise in the background. When things like this, when we're talking about the health of young people, it is very important. Everybody knows about the saying, young people are the future. So we need to make sure that we set up young people for the best chance in life to excel and to be the future leaders of tomorrow. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tasha. That was brilliant. I think a perfect mix of, we had some ambition from the in terms of policy front on the strategy, we had some ideas from business, and we had some really good, powerful challenge there from Tasha. Thank you. And just echo the importance of trade and trade deals and getting them right. Both, as I said, have huge impacts on the health side, but also on the environmental side, including climate. I think they say that of the huge proportion of food that we eat in the UK that is imported, there's estimates out there that maybe 70% of the environmental footprint of what we eat is impacted overseas, because obviously climate change, etc., crosses borders. So we have to think about those impacts overseas as well as what's going on in the UK. Thank you all for sticking to your time, which is brilliant, because it allows me 15 minutes or so just to probe you with one or two gentle questions, maybe one or two more challenging ones as well. But for those listening in, do feed in your questions. There'll be space for that to hear from you later, and really, really keen that we hear from a diverse range of views. Let us know what you agree with, what you disagree with, what you think the opportunities are, say particularly around addressing the climate crisis, but beyond as well. We can't talk about food without talking about health, animal welfare, biodiversity loss, workers' rights, etc. So it's a massive topic. I want to start on a kind of positive note, if I'm allowed to, and just going around one by one, just briefly, with a question about hope. As I said, there's a lot of negativity, a lot of uncertainty, multiple crises we're facing around, whether it's the recession, the pandemic, the climate crisis, biodiversity emergency, obesity crisis. There's a whole lot of negativity. Understandably, a lot of things which we need to take really seriously. But how can we maintain hope? Have you seen any signs of any sort of signs of positivity you can take from the last 6 months? Anything that you've seen, any glimmers of hope? Who wants to start me off? Maybe Tam's in on that front.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I agree with you. It's sometimes hard to dig deep to think about where the hope is, but there are three things that really give me hope. In the context of thinking about how we achieve our climate goals and contribute through decarbonising our diets. So I think, there are two routes to get there. There is radical or significant behaviour change, as well as radical technology change. And what I've seen over the past 6 months gives me hope that we can get there on both fronts. So on the behavioural change side, I think what we saw through COVID is that as the context changed, there were really rapid behavioural shifts. Some of them, and many of them imposed on a function or an artefact of the situation in which we found ourselves. But of course, out of home eating dropped, disappeared completely. There was more home cooking. There's some evidence that we shown our support, that there was more support for vegetable boxes and all the rest of it. And I think that if we can build on some of those shifts, then that can achieve some of the changes in diet that need to be made. I think also the other thing that government became a really key actor in the system, intervening in supporting bringing food to the vulnerable. There was interventions in close collaboration in supply chains and working with the retailers on that. And I think the expectation about the role that government plays or could play in people's diet shifted a bit over the course of the last few months. And I think those sort of rich conversations about what the expectations are of different actors is an aspect that we need to build on. I think also from a technology perspective, we've only just started on this journey in terms of decarbonising diets. And I think, you know, some of the things that Mark talked about gives us a lot of hope that we can, even with existing technologies, we can cut methane and nitrous oxide emissions by up to 40% in livestock systems today. So that's just with existing technologies. And there's lots of research and innovation in that space. We know that we are making big headrows in terms of substitution, re-engineering of food, and then small changes in terms of more vegetables and diet. So I think that with the right leadership from government and from industry and from civil society, there's a lot of hope there. And in the final, my final observation is I think that I saw government behaving differently on food policy in relation to COVID. So, you know, it started to move and looking at the food system in a less siloed way. And a group of ministers got together and started to look at the data and address some of the challenges, particularly in relation to affordability of food in a much more joined up way. And I saw the priority with which government placed on some of these issues shift. So that combination of institutional changes, behavioural shifts and technology changes is one of the three things that gives me hope.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tamsin. And I'll come back to you in a moment to ask, just I guess, come back to the question about, or the questions in my head about how can we ensure that we do have an ambitious policy environment that allows sustainable food and farming businesses to flourish and responsible technology where appropriate to flourish. I'll come and crucially, sort of building on one of Tasha's points, how do we know, how can we make sure that the strategy has teeth and happens? What can we do to try and make that happen? But before that, let's come to perhaps Tasha next. So what's giving you hope at the moment, Tasha?
There we go. I think the silver lining in the COVID pandemic is just kind of seeing the amount of people using their platforms as a voice. For example, you know, Marcus Rashford. So prior to him making his announcement for free school meals, we had Christina who ran a petition calling for free school meals to be extended over the holiday season. And that petition has got over 300,000 signatures. And then on top of that, we have such a big name in society using his platform to say, actually, these are the health disparities that we have within society and these need to change. And so similar to the last point that was just brought up is the government's response to it. At times it has been bad, but we can see that there is flexibility there. And that kind of approach that Boris took in the U-turn, that kind of shows how we can all change the narrative when we talk about obesity. For a long time, obesity has always been obviously the individual's fault. And if it's with children, it's the parents' fault. But actually, when we're looking at it with all these different campaigns and all these different people pointing out different issues within the food system, we realize the problem is not the individual, the problem is the food environments that we live in. Our environment has dramatically changed. It is not like what it was in the 1980s, 1990s, where there was open free space and fruit and vegetable was really accessible, it was affordable. That's not the case anymore. For a lot of young people, their high street is plagued with fast food shops. It is so easy for you to get food that is high in fat, salt and sugar at a ridiculously low price. And again, the healthy options are not accessible. And if they are, they're not affordable. And so it's about exposing these different problems within the food environment and how these, you know, the likes of Marcus Rashford have been able to spot them and actually talk about it and change the whole narrative when we talk about obesity. So I do think that the support that has come from the public and also figureheads like Marcus and perhaps the government as well kind of just gives me the hope that in 10 years' time we can halve childhood obesity, which is the ultimate goal for Bite Back.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tasha. Echo a lot of that, and certainly, I guess the key point is that we all do have power as people, as feed citizens, to make our voice heard and to try and participate in policy processes, to challenge or support businesses, and to change that food environment for the better. Absolutely. Thank you, Tasha. Mark, on to you. Similar question to you about hope, or kind of what gives you hope, or what excites you at the moment, but also a kind of follow-on question, you could, which is, I'd say, more around I guess the carbon market, and what are some of the opportunities and challenges that you see in creating a carbon market that functions properly, that makes a real difference and that farmers can get involved in.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, Dan. I mean, first of all, I'd say, one of the things that gives me hope is some of what Tasha just said. Actually, really inspiring to see the way that people are engaging in this debate and challenging and not accepting the way that we've always done things. And I think that's good. And is a kind of theme that runs through the answer to your first part of your question. I mean, firstly, I get a lot of hope just from seeing the way that the food system did actually stand up to the COVID crisis, and I think that needs to be celebrated. Actually, apart from some wobbles early on, by and large, the system did stand up, and I think is testament to the capability and the expertise and the people that work in it from farm to fork, really. Secondly, the leadership that's now being provided by governments, particularly in Europe. I mean, I've talked quite a bit about EU Green Deal, but a lot of what's in the EU Green Deal, actually, some of those ideas came from the UK. And it was good to see some of that being reflective in the agriculture bill the UK government introduced. Paying farmers for delivering public goods is something that I think a lot of us have talked about for many years. And government has this really powerful role that it can play in bringing people together, knocking heads together, and saying, "Come on, what can we do differently here?" And I think that gives me an awful lot of confidence that we're heading in the right direction. And thirdly, in my kind of area that I'm concentrating on, particularly with carbon and adoption of regenerative farm practices, just the willingness and the openness of growers to go on this journey really gives me a lot of confidence that we can make carbon farming, as it's called, work. And people, I think we sometimes underestimate the willingness of growers to go on that journey and the contribution that they can make. Given the right signal, given the right incentives and the right rewards, they can do this. And then fourthly, in answer to the first question, it's a combination of belief in practices and technology working together. It's not one or the other. It's both together, and a recognition that no one organization, company, government can do this on their own. It will take all of us to make this shift. I think then to your second question, Dan, what's crucial to making, let's call it, the carbon farming market work? Firstly is supporting growers on this journey to regenerative agriculture. It requires knowledge. It sometimes requires investment. Sometimes it requires a transition curve to go through. And so making sure that we use policy and fiscal tools that are available to us to support growers on that journey, I think is one answer to it. And then secondly, we've got to create confidence around the credits, the certificates that are generated. If we say a grower has sequestered 1 ton of carbon in the soil, make sure that we've got trusted, rigorous, robust methodologies around that to verify that accurately. Indigo's worked with VCS Vera and Climate Action Reserve Network in the US to do that. The EU is looking at introducing a regulatory framework for certifying carbon removals. I think these are steps in the right direction that will give confidence that these carbon markets can work and ensure that we get the transfer of funds from those that need to offset emissions that they can't reduce themselves by those certificates, credits, and a revenue stream can flow through to the growers for effectively doing the right thing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. We're almost out of time for this session, so what I might do is feed in 1 or 2 questions in the Q&A session later. But just very, very quickly, literally sort of 10 seconds each, who or what inspires you in food or farming at the moment? So what, again, if we're looking ahead to the future, trying to tackle climate crisis, amongst other things, who or what inspires you? Let's start with Tasha. Just very, very brief answers.
Oh, I don't know who and what inspires me. I think I do not know. I think from the top of my head, who inspires me are the likes of, Christina, likes of Dev on our youth board, who are just, 15, 16-year-olds who they just care about their health and care about the health of their peers and just want to make sure that is protected. And so their passion and their enthusiasm towards the food industry really does inspire me.
Tamsin, do you want to? Who
I'm
what
going
inspires
to give
you?
you, and I'm going to give you a policy response. I second, there are loads of people that inspire me, and often they are young people, but also the people who are using their voices. But from a policy perspective, where I think the big opportunities around the future farming scheme, the environment land management scheme, I think if we get that right, and if we get that sort of nature-rich, carbon-friendly farming right, that is a model that we can export to the world. I think there's a big opportunity around COP, obviously, and what's the domestic package we can put in place to showcase leadership externally. And I think there's lots of excitement around data sharing and science that that inspires me too.
Thank you, Tamsin. And literally in one word, if you can, Mark, who or what inspires you before you close this?
Next generation of people involved in an organization called Thought for Food, young agripreneurs, unconstrained by career thinking or anything else. They just say, why not? And that's where the ideas are going to come from.
Brilliant. Thank you all for that. We have to close that section now. Thank you. I can see the questions starting to come in. Hopefully you can all join us for the Q&A after. But thank you very much to all our speakers. Thank you.
Great. Well, Dan, Mark, Tamsin, Tasha, thank you all for a brilliant session. The panel are heading over to the Q&A now, which starts at 1 p.m. If you have a Gold Pass, just click on the link and join, and you can ask your questions now. If you don't have a Gold Pass, you can go and sign up for a free trial on the cogx.co website right now. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found the sessions as thought-provoking and as relevant in this week before UN Climate Week as I did. And next week, we'll be turning the spotlight to the businesses and looking at what the leading companies are doing to address the climate crisis. On the 30th of September, don't miss our session on the future of the NHS. And if you missed any of these sessions today or in the past, you can see them all for free on cogx.co to catch up or watch them again. Do check them out. And that's it for now. And thank you again for being here today. Thank you to the panel, and we'll see you soon. Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.